Is this real?
So it's a fucking coin toss? That's what 50 billion.
Get in the car and just start driving.
Copyright disclaimer under Section 107 of the Copyright Act 1976. Allowance is made for fair use for purposes such as criticism, comment, news reporting, scholarship, and research. Fair use is a use permitted by copyright statute that might otherwise be infringing. Nonprofit, educational, or personal use tips the balance in favor of fair use.
A House of Dynamite emerges as one of the most ambitiously constructed political apocalyptic thrillers of its era, created with the unmistakable precision of Kathryn Bigelow, whose return to filmmaking after a long hiatus instantly became a point of global attention. From the very beginning, the film positions itself not simply as a depiction of modern geopolitical tension but as a layered meditation on the fragility of institutional power, the fallibility of human decision-making, and the terrifying speed with which a technologically sophisticated world can be pushed to the brink of annihilation. Produced by First Light, Prologue Entertainment, and Kingsgate Films for Netflix, the film carries with it the high-gloss realism that defines Bigelow's style, paired with writer Noah Oppenheim's fascination with the inner workings of political and military machinery. In its design, it is an American film, but in its thematic ambition, it casts a far wider net, grappling with issues that transcend borders, the invisible networks of surveillance, the cold logic of nuclear deterrence, and the unnerving truth that, even in the most complex defense systems, decisions often rest on the instincts of a small number of individuals. Set against this backdrop, the narrative unfolds through a triptych structure, three intertwined perspectives that each reveal the same crisis from different vantage points, each adding new dimensions of emotional weight, political complexity, and moral ambiguity. This choice of structure immediately signals to the audience that the film is not content with simple answers or linear explanations. Instead, it wants to dig deep into the anatomy of panic, the architecture of authority, and the choreography of institutional response when the unimaginable happens. A single nuclear missile is detected inbound to the United States, with no clear indication of who launched it, why it was fired, or whether it is a false alarm. This single moment, cold, mechanical, ambiguous, becomes the axis around which the entire film turns. The first of these narrative movements focuses on the early detection process and the political awakening to the threat. It's a world of dimly lit hallways, hurried aides, and officials pulled from routine duties into a moment that could redefine the planet. Through this perspective, the film shows how information is communicated upward, how doubt spreads even as confirmation remains uncertain, and how the intricate machinery of government shifts into a mode of existential urgency. The tension in these scenes is not built around action sequences but around the weight of silence, the oppressive tick of time, and the subtle but powerful body language of leaders who understand the stakes long before the public does. The second perspective brings the audience into the heart of military operations. Here, Bigelow dives into technical realism, reconstructing the protocols, sequences, decision trees, and defensive measures that sit behind the scenes of America's nuclear readiness. This section carries a raw intensity as various branches of military command attempt to reconcile their own data, evaluate possible interception strategies, and calculate response options that could mean the difference between containment and full-scale war. The hitting a bullet with a bullet metaphor becomes the emotional anchor of this segment, an acknowledgement that intercepting a nuclear missile is not merely a technical challenge but a metaphysical gamble. The closest humanity comes to throwing a stone at fate and hoping it deflects disaster. Technical staff, commanders, and strategists all carry their own burdens, and Bigelow makes a point of showing how even the most technical decisions have human consequences. The audience sees faces close up, exhausted eyes staring at monitors, trembling hands hovering over confirmation keys, and the quiet heroism of those who must execute their duties with absolute precision even as fear gnaws at the edges of their composure. The third perspective returns to the highest echelon of the political hierarchy. This is where Idris Elba's president and Jared Harris's Secretary of Defense Reed Baker step into the foreground, fully embodying the crushing responsibility of leadership under looming catastrophe. The president is shown balancing not only his professional obligations but the personal weight of family, public presence, and private doubt. This duality, an individual expected to project unshakable authority even as internal uncertainty threatens to unravel him, becomes one of the film's most powerful emotional threads. Reed Baker, meanwhile, offers a deeply human counterpoint, a seasoned public servant reeling from the recent loss of his wife, forced to navigate a crisis that demands clarity, resolve, and absolute rationality at a moment when the foundations of his private life have collapsed. His grief becomes a lens through which the film explores how personal vulnerability intersects with national duty. The scenes involving Baker are some of the most emotionally charged in the entire film. They reveal how a single individual's state of mind can influence the trajectory of global events. Rebecca Ferguson's Captain Olivia Walker functions as the connective tissue throughout these segments. A military communications officer placed at the nexus of information flow, she embodies both the discipline of service and the essential humanity that underlies it. Through her, the audience sees not only the rigorous chain of command but the emotional toll of bearing news, transmitting orders, and maintaining professional control when catastrophe seems imminent. Her presence in secure communication rooms, on encrypted lines, and in critical exchanges with leadership underscores the reality that entire systems rely on individuals who must process world-altering information with clarity and speed. As the film progresses, the three narratives spiral closer, each revealing new details that recontextualize earlier scenes. Seemingly minor gestures acquire new meaning, fragmented conversations gain coherence, and the full scope of the crisis becomes clear. The film keeps the audience suspended between the intimate and the immense, between small human moments and the looming possibility of global devastation. Each perspective sharpens the central question: what constitutes an appropriate response to the unknown? The chain of decision-making gains a gravity that transcends national identity. The missile becomes a symbol of uncertainty, of miscommunication, of the terrifying possibility that one wrong assumption can unleash irreversible destruction. Bigelow's direction ensures that the film feels relentlessly real. The cinematography by Barry Ackroyd uses handheld movements, intense close-ups, and stark lighting to emphasize the claustrophobic atmosphere of high-level decision rooms. Volker Bertelmann's score underlines the sense of impending doom with minimalist, steady, heartbeat-like rhythms. There is no melodramatic orchestration, no heroic fanfare, just a slow, unyielding pulse that mirrors the countdown implicit in every scene. Editing stitches the three timelines together with precision, ensuring that the audience feels the mounting pressure without ever losing narrative orientation. The craft extends beyond style into thematic resonance. The film interrogates the paradoxes of deterrence, the notion that peace is maintained through readiness for destruction, that safety requires perpetual vigilance, and that the systems designed to prevent catastrophe also hold the potential to trigger it. Bigelow's social commentary is unmistakable. She invites viewers to confront the uncomfortable reality that even the most advanced nations live in a state of fragile equilibrium, where technology amplifies both security and vulnerability. The title A House of Dynamite captures this contradiction perfectly, the idea that the very structures designed to protect us are built atop foundations that could, under the wrong circumstances, explode. The cast elevates the already dense material. Idris Elba delivers a performance steeped in quiet authority, restrained emotion, and internal struggle. His portrayal avoids the clichés of political leadership, instead presenting a nuanced, conflicted, and deeply human figure. Rebecca Ferguson's controlled intensity grounds the film in the lived experience of those who execute orders rather than create them. Jared Harris brings depth to a role that could easily have drifted into stereotype, imbuing Baker with a tragic dignity and a profound emotional arc that resonates far beyond the boundaries of the plot. The supporting cast, including Gabriel Basso, Tracy Letts, Greta Lee, Moses Ingram, Anthony Ramos, Jonah Hauer-King, and Jason Clarke, populate the film with voices that feel authentic, each contributing subtly to the tapestry of crisis. The film's premiere at the 82nd Venice International Film Festival was met with a standing ovation, a testament to its craft, tension, and emotional resonance. Critics praised its unflinching realism, its commitment to depicting high-stakes decision-making without sensationalism, and its ability to create suspense through psychological and procedural detail rather than action spectacle. Some critiques targeted its portrayal of missile defense systems, including objections from the U.S. Missile Defense Agency regarding its depiction of intercept success rates, but even these criticisms underscore the film's impact. It provoked conversation, debate, and reflection about systems normally shrouded in secrecy. The film's staggered release, first in Venice, then in select theaters in the UK and United States, and finally on Netflix, allowed it to build momentum gradually, prompting discussions about nuclear deterrence, political accountability, and the modern world's dependence on fragile systems. Viewers around the world resonated with its blend of suspense, emotional complexity, and intellectual engagement. Its long-form structure, meditative pacing, and intricate details reward multiple viewings, as each rewatch reveals new connections, subtle foreshadowing, and thematic intricacies. One of the most compelling aspects of the film is its refusal to offer easy answers. It does not depict a world neatly divided into heroes and villains. Instead, it explores a landscape where intelligence is incomplete, communication is imperfect, and decisions must be made under crushing uncertainty. It asks whether caution or resolve is the wiser path, whether hesitation is dangerous or essential, and whether leadership can ever truly be prepared for decisions that carry such enormous consequences. The film's power lies not in spectacle but in its capacity to evoke dread, empathy, and contemplation. It paints the global political system as a precarious structure held together by human judgment, fallible processes, and the constant hope that logic will prevail over panic. As the film draws to its conclusion, the viewer is left not with the satisfaction of closure but with the lingering, unsettling awareness of how thin the line is between calm and catastrophe. Bigelow embraces ambiguity, reinforcing the idea that the world we inhabit is one in which certainty is a luxury and danger can erupt from silence. This commitment to realism, emotional depth, and thematic complexity solidifies A House of Dynamite as not just a film but an artistic statement about the age of nuclear tension. It is a cinematic reminder that the systems designed to protect humanity are built by imperfect people, operating under extreme conditions, within structures that can both safeguard and endanger civilization. The film's legacy will likely endure not because of shock value or spectacle, but because it confronts audiences with the reality that the world's most consequential decisions are often made by individuals who must navigate fear, grief, responsibility, and uncertainty simultaneously. In doing so, A House of Dynamite stands as a landmark work, bold, unsettling, and deeply reflective of the anxieties of our time. A House of Dynamite emerges as a riveting exploration of political tension and human decision-making in the face of imminent catastrophe. The film, a 2025 American production, crafted under the precise direction of Kathryn Bigelow and penned by Noah Oppenheim, immediately situates the viewer within a world where the stakes could not be higher. It is a story that examines not merely the external threat of a nuclear strike but the internal crises faced by leaders and military officials who must navigate moral, ethical, and procedural quandaries under the most extreme pressure. The premise, deceptively simple, is that a lone intercontinental ballistic missile is launched toward the United States, triggering a complex series of events that will test the mettle of every character involved and question the very nature of responsibility and authority. The narrative structure itself defies conventional linear storytelling, presenting the same critical time frame 3 times from different perspectives, each iteration peeling back layers of motivation, intention, and consequence, allowing the audience to experience the chaos, confusion, and urgency in a Rashomon-like fashion that is both intellectually stimulating and emotionally overwhelming. The first perspective introduces Captain Olivia Walker, portrayed by Rebecca Ferguson, whose role in the White House Situation Room places her at the nexus of information flow and decision-making. She embodies both the tension and the determination required of someone whose actions and decisions could mean the difference between survival and annihilation. Through her eyes, the audience is granted access to the frantic attempts to confirm the missile's trajectory, the source of its launch, and the potential ramifications of each possible response. Her character is meticulous, precise, and driven by a blend of professional duty and personal conscience, demonstrating the human element behind the cold procedural veneer of government operations. Her interactions with other key figures, military advisors, intelligence analysts, and political appointees, highlight the collaborative yet often conflicting forces that shape decision-making at the highest levels. Each conversation and tactical decision is imbued with tension, illustrating the delicate balance between urgency and prudence, fear and rationality. Shifting to the second perspective, the audience encounters General Anthony Brady, portrayed by Tracy Letts, whose hawkish tendencies provide a counterpoint to Walker's procedural caution. Brady represents the military instinct to act decisively, to strike first when threatened, yet his perspective also reveals the psychological pressures and personal biases that can influence judgment under extreme conditions. His internal struggle, as much as his external command, underscores the film's thematic exploration of power, responsibility, and human fallibility. Through his lens, the missile is not merely a threat to abstract national security, it is a personal call to action, a scenario in which failure is not an option, and the consequences of hesitation are unthinkable. The tension is amplified by the juxtaposition of his urgent, forceful stance against the more measured, intelligence-driven approach advocated by Walker and her team, creating a dynamic interplay of competing ideologies that heightens suspense and moral complexity. The third and final perspective centers on the President of the United States, played with gravitas by Idris Elba. This perspective delves deeply into the ultimate burden of leadership, depicting the psychological weight of decisions that carry irreversible consequences. Elba's portrayal captures the delicate balance of authority, empathy, and restraint required of a figure who must weigh conflicting advice, interpret incomplete data, and navigate political, strategic, and ethical considerations simultaneously. The narrative from the president's viewpoint is at once intimate and grand, revealing the human cost of command while situating the crisis within the broader national and international context. Each decision point is loaded with tension, and the audience is invited to consider the moral and existential implications of nuclear deterrence, authority, and the potential for miscalculation in moments of extreme duress. The film's nonlinear structure is central to its impact, offering multiple repetitions of the same timeframe, each with additional information and nuanced shifts in perspective that challenge the audience to re-evaluate assumptions and recognize the subjectivity inherent in perception and interpretation. This narrative approach amplifies suspense and fosters a deep engagement with the story's moral and procedural dilemmas. The repeated loops create a sense of inevitability and inescapable tension, mirroring the characters' own constrained temporal reality as they race against the clock to avert disaster. Within this framework, every decision, hesitation, and misinterpretation carries immense weight, reinforcing the stakes and immersing the viewer in a real-time experience of crisis management and existential threat. The ensemble cast supports this intricate narrative with nuanced performances that underscore the human dimension of the high-stakes scenario. Gabriel Basso as Jake Barrington, the Deputy National Security Advisor, brings a perspective rooted in intelligence, analytical reasoning, and loyalty, often serving as a mediator between contrasting viewpoints. Jared Harris portrays Secretary of Defense Reed Baker, whose experience and strategic insight provide a stabilizing force amidst chaos, while Anthony Ramos as Major Daniel Gonzalez and Moses Ingram as FEMA official Kathy Rogers illustrate the broader national machinery mobilized in response to such an unprecedented threat. Each supporting character contributes depth and realism, reinforcing the layered complexity of government operations during a national crisis. The technical craftsmanship of the film is equally meticulous. Barry Ackroyd's cinematography captures the tension and urgency with precision, employing tight framing, dynamic camera movement, and a muted color palette that emphasizes the gravitas of the unfolding events. The editing by Kirk Baxter ensures clarity within the nonlinear structure, guiding the audience seamlessly through the overlapping timelines and perspectives without confusion. Volker Bertelmann's score underscores the emotional and narrative tension, combining subtle, atmospheric motifs with bursts of intensity that mirror the characters' psychological states and the accelerating stakes. The sound design by Paul N. J. Otteson heightens realism, from the ambient hum of the Situation Room to the mechanical precision of missile systems, immersing viewers in an authentic and visceral experience. Catherine Bigelow's directorial approach demonstrates a profound understanding of both cinematic technique and narrative pacing, blending technical authenticity with dramatic tension. Her consultation with military experts and government advisors ensures that the procedural and operational elements of the story maintain credibility, while her ability to capture the human dimension of the crisis, through facial expressions, body language, and interpersonal dynamics, grounds the film emotionally. The thematic exploration extends beyond mere suspense, prompting reflection on leadership, moral responsibility, human error, and the consequences of wielding immense power under conditions of uncertainty and fear. The release strategy further amplified the film's reach and impact. Premiering at the 82nd Venice International Film Festival on September 2, 2025, it received immediate attention from critics and audiences for its intense pacing, innovative narrative structure, and performances. Limited theatrical releases in the UK and USA, followed by a global Netflix streaming launch on October 24, 2025, allowed the film to reach a broad audience while retaining its prestige and critical engagement. Marketing efforts, including teasers and full-length trailers, emphasized the immediacy of the crisis, the procedural drama of the White House and military responses, and the psychological stakes faced by each character, successfully generating anticipation and discussion prior to the streaming release. Critically, A House of Dynamite elicited a spectrum of responses. Some reviewers praised it as a white-knuckle procedural that immerses viewers in a realistic and morally complex crisis scenario, highlighting Bigelow's deft direction and the compelling performances of the ensemble cast. Others critiqued its repetitive narrative structure and ambiguous ending, noting that the film leaves unresolved questions about the missile's impact and origin, creating polarized audience reactions. Nevertheless, the film's capacity to provoke discussion regarding nuclear deterrence, ethical responsibility, and the psychological weight of decision-making in extreme circumstances attests to its thematic ambition and narrative complexity. A House of Dynamite emerges as one of the most provocative and unsettling political thrillers of its era, a work built not merely to entertain but to grip the global psyche with the cold metallic hand of possibility. In crafting a world that mirrors our own so closely that the distinction becomes almost uncomfortable, the filmmakers pull the viewer into an emotional, intellectual, and existential confrontation with the fragility of modern civilization. From the opening minutes, it is clear that this film does not intend to be a spectacle of explosions, nor a parade of military hardware. Instead, it positions itself as a psychological instrument, a cinematic pressure chamber in which characters, governments, and audiences are all subjected to the unbearable tension of a single, devastating question: what would happen if an unattributed nuclear missile suddenly appeared on radar, cutting through the skies toward the United States? The film begins with an atmosphere of ambient dread, a sense that something in the geopolitical weather has shifted just slightly, the way an experienced sailor senses a storm long before clouds appear. Quiet scenes in the White House Situation Room reveal analysts and officers scanning data streams, the mundane glow of screens painting their faces. Captain Olivia Walker, played with icy conviction and underlying vulnerability by Rebecca Ferguson, reads signals intelligence reports about unusual movements in East Asia. There are hints of Chinese naval patterns shifting off their usual rhythms, speculations about Iranian missile technicians being spotted in places they should not be, and an eerie silence from North Korean communication nodes that typically flicker ceaselessly with encrypted chatter. This is the hum of the modern world, the constant possibility of something going wrong, of wires crossing invisibly across continents, of leaders miles apart misreading each other's intent. Before the viewer has time to settle into the rhythms of the intelligence apparatus, the film makes its first decisive leap into crisis. The sea-based X-band radar, floating in the Pacific like a lonely metal island, detects an object that should not exist, an intercontinental ballistic missile already in mid-flight, already beyond the threshold where questions of origin matter in the immediate sense. It appears on screen not as a dramatic line but as a tiny pixel, a blip in the data stream. This is the first hard shock of the film. The detonation of tension occurs not with noise but with total quiet. The characters' reactions are equally quiet, defined by the sudden stiffening of Walker's posture, the tightening grip of the technician's hand on his headset, the silent fear crossing the eyes of those who understand what such a reading implies. From this moment, the story fractures into three overlapping perspectives, each offering its own insight into the machinery, both human and institutional, through which national decisions are made in the heat of existential threat. The technique is reminiscent of earlier political thrillers and wartime epics, but here it is employed with an almost claustrophobic intensity. Each perspective feels like a room with no windows, and the viewer is passed from chamber to chamber as the crisis escalates. The first perspective unfolds largely through the eyes of Walker and Major Daniel Gonzalez, the officer in charge of a ground-based interceptor site at Fort Greely in Alaska. Gonzalez, portrayed with brooding tension and humanity by Anthony Ramos, is a man caught between duty and the increasingly unbearable weight of responsibility placed upon him. In one scene he rehearses a message to his daughter, never recording it, never sending it, hovering at the edge of a moment he hopes he will never need. Each gesture reveals a man who understands that his actions, or failures, could determine whether millions live or die. The film's portrayal of missile interception is neither glorified nor laden with technobabble. Instead, it confronts the brutal truth: hitting a ballistic missile with another missile is one of the hardest feats engineering and military science have ever attempted. The dialogue between analysts and officers crackles with specificity but never loses the emotional core. These people are terrified. Their professional calm is a thin veneer over deep anxiety. Interceptors are launched, one, then another, and the camera holds agonizingly long on the data screens as green icons rise to meet a red one. The first interceptor tumbles off course. The second fails to acquire its target. Suddenly the impossible, the unthinkable, becomes mathematically probable. A nuclear warhead with an unknown origin is still coming. The second perspective shifts to General Brady, Anna Park, and the National Security Advisor portrayed by Gabriel Basso. This section delves into the bureaucratic, political, and philosophical chaos unleashed by uncertainty. Analysts argue about probabilities. One insists the launch bears hallmarks of North Korean vector trajectories, another argues that new intelligence suggests it might be a false flag operation. Brady, hardened by decades of military service, pushes for decisive action, preparation for retaliation. Park argues for restraint, warning that misinterpretation could lead to a global catastrophe worse than anything the incoming missile might do. The National Security Advisor stands between these extremes, embodying the paralysis that comes when no choice seems morally or strategically safe. The dialogues in this section are some of the most gripping in the film. Characters are forced to confront their own assumptions about adversaries and allies. They challenge the idea of deterrence, question the reliability of technology, and show the audience that in a real crisis, geopolitical narratives are not as clear-cut as political speeches make them seem. The filmmakers ensure that the tension never dissipates. Even in rooms without screens or alarms, the stakes are palpable. Personal frictions add layers to the tension, disagreements escalate, tempers flare, and quiet moments reveal private fears. The third perspective places the viewer alongside the president, played with tremendous gravitas by Idris Elba, his aide Lieutenant Commander Robert Reeves, and Secretary of Defense Reed Baker, portrayed by Jared Harris in one of his most haunting performances. This segment offers a powerful emotional counterpoint to the procedural intensity of the first two. While the Situation Room teems with data, and Fort Greely roars with failing interceptors, the president begins the segment in a gymnasium, speaking to students at a basketball clinic. The intrusion of the crisis into an ordinary, hopeful space serves as a stark juxtaposition. The machinery of destruction and decision-making does not pause for innocence. When the president is whisked to Marine One and subsequently to secure facilities, the film begins to explore the psychological toll of leadership. Reeves opens the nuclear football, explaining protocols the president already knows but must hear again because the gravity of the moment demands it. Baker, meanwhile, is unraveling internally. He is grieving his wife, fractured from his daughter, and carrying the crushing conviction that the world is sliding toward a war it cannot survive. His despair culminates in one of the film's most emotionally devastating sequences. As chaos electrifies the corridors around him, Baker chooses to step away from evacuation, to walk up a staircase onto a rooftop, and to face the night sky one last time before stepping forward into silence. His choice is framed not as surrender but as a man crushed by a lifetime of responsibility and haunted by a world in danger of burning. The final act of the film presses all perspectives together in a crescendo of uncertainty. The president is handed authentication codes. Reeves, steady but shaken, guides him through each step of the process. The Situation Room waits for word. Major Gonzalez kneels outside his base, overcome by the failure of the interceptors. Phones buzz with desperate messages left for loved ones. Civilians in major cities receive ominous alerts and are shepherded into shelters or onto highways that are already beginning to clog. The score rises not with bombast but with an oppressive, sustained note that seems to stretch time itself. And then, in an act of deliberate narrative audacity, the film refuses to answer the question it has spent 2 hours building toward. It fades not with an explosion, nor a sigh of relief, but with the swirling fog of ambiguity. Did the missile hit? Did the president authorize retaliation? Who launched it? The story leaves these questions hanging, not to frustrate the audience but to force them into the same suffocating uncertainty that real leaders would face in such a crisis. The ambiguity becomes a mirror, reflecting back the fragility of global security and the impossibility of perfect information in moments where seconds are the difference between peace and annihilation. From a thematic standpoint, the film is a meditation on the human psyche under extreme pressure, on the illusion of control in a world connected by delicate threads, and on the terrifying truth that civilization continues to function only because people in positions of power make the right choices more often than not, choices that are never guaranteed. It interrogates the assumption that deterrence is stable, that governments are unified during crisis, that technology provides certainty. Instead, it portrays a system full of doubt, disagreement, emotional wounds, and the ever-present possibility of catastrophic misjudgment. The performances give the film its emotional backbone. Rebecca Ferguson portrays Walker with a balance of competence and silent dread, her voice steady even as her eyes flicker with fear. Anthony Ramos delivers a performance defined by the tension between duty and humanity, becoming the quiet emotional core of the film. Idris Elba brings presidential authority while revealing the loneliness and immense weight carried by national leaders. Jared Harris's portrayal of Baker is particularly unforgettable, grief-stricken, brilliant, collapsing under the immense moral weight of the moment. He becomes a tragic symbol of the burden placed on those tasked with protecting nations. Critics have noted that the film's use of smartphones and personal technology adds a modern emotional layer. Characters send messages to loved ones, search for news, glance at timelines, or hold on to their devices like lifelines. The film argues, subtly, that in the digital age, our most personal connections become more precious in moments of collective danger. The cinematography by Barry Ackroyd intensifies the realism. His handheld shots in government corridors create a documentary-like immediacy, while colder, stiller frames inside secure facilities underscore the sterility of the decision-making environment. The editing by Kirk Baxter knits the perspectives together with surgical precision, allowing the story to cohere even as it jumps in time and viewpoint. Volker Bertelmann's score vibrates beneath the surface of each scene, not so much music as atmospheric pressure building. Upon its release, the film sparked widespread discussion. Viewers debated the ambiguous ending, some claiming it was a narrative cop-out, others praising it as a bold refusal to offer comforting answers. Social media filled with debates about deterrence theory, the accuracy of missile defense portrayals, real-world nuclear protocols, and whether humanity is genuinely prepared for such a crisis. Analysts, journalists, and policymakers weighed in, turning the film into a cultural conversation starter rather than just a piece of entertainment. The film's ultimate message lies not in providing answers but in forcing audiences to confront questions society often avoids. What does it mean to live in a world where a single malfunction, miscommunication, or malicious act could trigger global catastrophe? How do leaders cope with decisions that must be made under extreme uncertainty? What weight does duty carry when the stakes are as high as human survival? And perhaps most chillingly, can any system, no matter how sophisticated, ever fully prevent disaster when weapons of such power exist? A House of Dynamite ends with the lingering sense that modern civilization is both incredibly resilient and terrifyingly vulnerable. It is a story about people, flawed, frightened, courageous, inside a massive machine that is itself built on guesswork, assumptions, and fragile human judgment. By refusing to provide closure, the film does something rare: it hands the moral responsibility back to the audience. It asks them to imagine what they would do, how they would choose, how they would live in the presence of doubt. It leaves viewers with a sensation like static in the air, an unresolved charge waiting for the next spark. The world has always lived with fears that hide beneath the surface of daily life, tensions that move quietly under the calm exterior of nations exchanging promises, threats, and careful diplomatic gestures. But every now and then, a story emerges that does not merely entertain or frighten, it confronts us with an uncomfortable mirror, one showing how fragile our systems truly are. This is the energy that pulses through A House of Dynamite, a film that speaks not only to geopolitical realities but to the human beings who must navigate them, fraught with flaws, doubts, and responsibilities they never fully asked for. In telling the story of a single missile detected over the Pacific, unclaimed, unverified, and possibly a harbinger of nuclear catastrophe, the film invites us into a world where every second counts, not because explosions are imminent but because decisions made inside quiet rooms may determine whether tens of millions live or die. And at the heart of this narrative lies the uneasy truth that technology, doctrine, and protocol matter, but human judgment matters even more, especially when the stakes are high enough to eclipse reason itself. The film begins by sinking the viewer into the life of Captain Olivia Walker, a duty officer inside the White House Situation Room whose job is often defined by monitoring the beats of the world, intelligence updates, satellite pings, intercepted signals, diplomatic cables, all the tiny pieces of global reality that come together into a tapestry of risk. We watch her navigate a seemingly ordinary day, the kind of day in which nothing feels imminent but everything feels possible. China sends new formations into disputed waters. Iran's government appears to be repositioning certain assets. North Korea's lines of communication go dark. Any of these developments might be routine, or they might be the beginnings of something far worse. Olivia carries the weight of these uncertainties with a professionalism that feels lived in, but the film also shows subtle hints of the pressure she has learned to bury beneath crisp posture and controlled tone. Bigelow's direction makes clear that the work of national security is not glamorous, it is a quiet, often lonely existence in which judgment is a constant companion and failure is unthinkable. When the radar system SBX-1 detects an ICBM mid-flight, unusual, unclaimed, and moving with a trajectory that could bring it toward American soil, it is Olivia's composure that becomes the fragile foundation upon which the next hour of story is built. Simultaneously, the film turns our attention toward Major Daniel Gonzalez, stationed at Fort Greely, Alaska. He commands the missile defense crews whose job is to prepare for the rare but catastrophic scenario that now appears to be unfolding. The film shows him running drills, speaking with his team, and trying to maintain the blend of confidence and restrained anxiety that military officers must perfect. His relationship with the men and women under his command is one of mutual belief but also mutual fear. They all know that the ground-based mid-course defense system has a mixed historical record. They know that in simulations, some interceptors fail. They know that the window to act is small. And they know that if they fail, the consequences are unimaginable. The camera lingers on Daniel's eyes as he receives the call that sets everything in motion, and we watch him transform from a calm instructor into a man who must guide his teams through a once-in-a-generation nightmare. His storyline is emotionally compelling because the film does not treat him as an action hero but as a person with doubts, memories, and a desire to live up to the trust placed in him. From these two perspectives at the edges of the national defense system, the story expands into the most politically charged setting of all, the Oval Office and the individuals who form the president's inner circle. Idris Elba plays the president not as a symbol but as a human being whose authority is constantly shaped by the competing voices around him. He is carrying the weight of decisions made earlier in his administration, as well as personal concerns for his wife, who happens to be abroad in Kenya at the very moment an unidentified missile appears to be heading toward American territory. The movie's pacing intensifies when the president receives the first briefing, and it becomes clear that the room around him is fracturing under the weight of uncertainty. His Secretary of Defense, Reed Baker, played with deep humanity by Jared Harris, is still grappling with the grief of losing his wife. His judgment is clouded not by incompetence but by sorrow, and the film takes great care to show how personal pain can echo in professional spaces even when leaders try to bury it. The National Security Advisor, the Joint Chiefs, intelligence officials, and communication officers all approach the crisis differently, and the resulting chaos is chilling because it feels real. One of the film's most poignant elements is its willingness to show that in moments of global crisis, not all signs point in the same direction. Intelligence reports contradict each other. Analysts disagree about the missile's origin. Psychologists warn that retaliatory decisions may be premature. Allies remain silent or confused. The missile defense crews report that intercepting the projectile may or may not work, depending on factors they cannot yet compute. It is in this fog of conflicting data that the president must decide whether to order a retaliatory strike, to launch interceptors, or to wait for more information. And because the film is constructed through overlapping timelines and perspectives, the viewer constantly feels the ticking clock of real-time uncertainty even as the story replays events from different vantage points. Noah Oppenheim's writing highlights the emotional architecture beneath the policies, showing that each individual decision is shaped not only by logic but by fear, instinct, history, and the desperate need to avoid irreversible mistakes. As the narrative deepens, the film turns toward the human stories unfolding across the nation beyond the Situation Room and Stratcom command centers. Through limited but powerful glimpses, we see families receiving push notifications about unusual defense activity, social media erupting with rumors, and people trying to reach loved ones while networks slow under the strain of sudden mass communication. It is here that Bigelow introduces the subtle but important theme of smartphones and modern dependency. Characters throughout the film constantly reach for their phones, not for entertainment but for connection, validation, and emotional grounding. The president himself sends a calm but coded message to the First Lady, trying to reassure her while avoiding causing alarm. Olivia Walker scrolls through a text from a sibling she has not spoken to in months. Daniel Gonzalez looks at a picture of his daughter's drawing pinned to his phone case moments before initiating a missile defense sequence. These moments show that even in the halls of power and in the heart of the defense apparatus, the impulse to reach for connection is universal. The film does not depict this habit as a flaw but as a testament to how human beings cope with crises that stretch far beyond their ability to control them. In one of the film's most powerful stretches, we see the government leadership split along lines of philosophy, emotion, and information. Some argue that failing to retaliate signals weakness. Others counter that responding without identifying the aggressor risks beginning a global nuclear war. The president wants clarity, but clarity is impossible. The Secretary of Defense urges a defensive posture while he privately battles overwhelming grief. The National Intelligence Officer for North Korea, played by Greta Lee, argues that their analysis remains incomplete, suggesting the possibility of an unauthorized launch or even an engineering malfunction. The film insists that these arguments are not simply theoretical. They are visceral confrontations born of people afraid of making history's deadliest mistake. And in these scenes, Bigelow's direction is especially acute, the camera is unsteady, the lighting is claustrophobic, and the silence between spoken words speaks louder than any dialogue. A room full of brilliant, experienced officials is reduced to human beings who must choose between catastrophic errors. Meanwhile, at Fort Greely, Daniel Gonzalez and his team move through the highly choreographed steps of preparing for an interceptor launch. They check readings, align targeting systems, monitor the missile's projected trajectory, and cross-verify data flowing from satellites, radar stations, and allied intelligence. The tension here is built not through spectacle but through procedural detail. Every button pressed, every code keyed in, every shouted acknowledgement feels like an act of hope in the face of overwhelming uncertainty. The film underscores that missile defense is not a perfect shield. It is an attempt, a heroic but fallible attempt, to stop something designed by engineers to be unstoppable. Daniel's crew is composed of individuals who understand the limitations of their tools, and this knowledge haunts their eyes even as they execute their orders with military precision. The brilliance of A House of Dynamite lies in its refusal to give the viewer a fully omniscient vantage point. Just as the characters struggle with incomplete information, so too does the audience. The film shows radar screens, classified briefings, maps, and intelligence snippets, but no single perspective yields the full truth. Instead, the story builds its emotional depth by showing how people construct illumination from the fragments they have. For the president, this means trusting his advisors even when they contradict one another. For Olivia, it means synthesizing data and issuing recommendations while suppressing her own fear. For Daniel, it means accepting that success is not guaranteed and that courage sometimes takes the form of proceeding despite doubt. As the missile draws closer to its mid-course point, the window in which an interceptor might succeed, the narrative threads converge into a crescendo of decision-making. The president must decide whether to authorize a retaliatory option. The Secretary of Defense must determine whether to advise restraint in the face of uncertainty. Daniel Gonzalez must initiate the launch protocol. Olivia must relay the final updates that inform these decisions. And yet, even in this convergence, the film allows room for vulnerability. The president places his hands flat on the table, eyes closed, grappling with the fact that his choice may save millions or doom them. Olivia glances briefly at her phone, a small and deeply human gesture of wanting to feel something ordinary in a moment that feels apocalyptic. Daniel whispers a few words under his breath, not a prayer exactly, but a plea for the chance to see his daughter again. The film does not rely on spectacle to deliver its emotional climax. Instead, it emphasizes sound, the low hum of machines, the clipped tones of radio messages, the overlapping dialogue of analysts trying to calculate probabilities, the distant rumbling of interceptor silos preparing to fire. When the interceptors finally launch, the moment is portrayed not as triumph but as desperate hope. The camera stays with Daniel's face rather than the missiles themselves, capturing the way his jaw tightens and his eyes narrow as he listens to the updates. The president receives word that the intercept attempt has mixed results. Uncertainty still shrouds the missile's payload, trajectory, and origin. And even after the intercept, the tension does not dissolve, because the motivations and identity of the attacker, or rogue systems, remain unknown. The decision about retaliation is portrayed with extraordinary nuance. The film refuses to offer a simple answer, and this refusal is one of its greatest strengths. Some members of the national security team argue that retaliation is necessary to prevent future attacks. Others argue that an unknown origin means retaliation could hit the wrong country, igniting a war based on fear rather than fact. The president listens, absorbs, questions, hesitates, and wrestles with the implications of each option. The audience is not told what the right choice is, instead, they are invited to sit inside the moral ambiguity that defines real-world leadership in crisis. What the film ultimately communicates is that nuclear policy is not a distant abstraction but a human burden. Behind the protocols are people who care, who break, who hesitate, who argue from conviction or ego or pain. The missile may be the catalyst, but the true conflict lies in the hearts and minds of those charged with responding to it. When the president finally makes his decision, one framed not as an answer but as a deeply human leap of judgment, the film lingers not on the consequences but on the emotional fallout inside the situation room. The officials sit in stunned silence, each reckoning with what they have just influenced. Olivia exhales for the first time in what feels like an eternity. Daniel leans back in his chair at Fort Greely, exhausted but still vigilant. The country holds its breath. In the aftermath of the crisis, the film shifts into a tone of reflection. The president revisits the conversation with the First Lady, revealing the emotional weariness beneath his composed exterior. Olivia goes home and finally allows herself to feel the fear she suppressed throughout the ordeal. Daniel calls his daughter, listening to her speak about her day with a tenderness that contrasts sharply with the enormity of the decisions he has just made. These moments remind the audience that behind the screens, the intelligence reports, and the military orders are individuals whose lives continue beyond the crisis. They are heroes not because they wear capes or wield weapons but because they bear responsibility with humility and vulnerability. What makes A House of Dynamite powerful is its resonance beyond its narrative. It is a story about modern geopolitics, but it is also a story about human fragility. It challenges the myth of perfect systems and instead highlights how close the world often is to unintended catastrophe. It portrays technology as impressive but imperfect, policymaking as deliberate but flawed, and human beings as courageous but conflicted. It shows that in moments of existential crisis, nations do not act, people do. And people, in all their brilliance and imperfection, must carry the burden of preventing global tragedy. The film invites the viewer to consider how societies place immense faith in institutions, assuming that their complexity equates to infallibility. But Bigelow's work emphasizes that institutions are only as strong as the individuals within them, and those individuals carry personal histories, private wounds, and emotional thresholds. A Secretary of Defense grieving his wife may think differently. A president worried about a loved one in another country may hesitate. A young officer working late, feeling the weight of her own unspoken fears, may speak with a tone that shifts a room. In the world of nuclear policy, these subtleties matter immensely, and the film shows them not as weaknesses but as truths that should be acknowledged. Throughout its long and intricate development of the crisis, the movie also critiques the optimistic narratives often associated with missile defense. It confronts the myth that technological shields guarantee perfect safety, instead presenting a realistic portrayal in which systems can misread data, interceptors can fail, and operators must make decisions within time constraints that deny absolute certainty. This perspective sparked debate in real life, as some government agencies reportedly felt the film's depiction was too pessimistic. But the filmmakers lean into this discomfort as a way to force audiences to reckon with the precariousness of nuclear security. The closing moments of the film are haunting not because of what happens but because of what is left unresolved. The missile's origin remains ambiguous. The international response remains uncertain. The political consequences are only hinted at. And yet, the emotional truth is complete: the crisis has reshaped the people involved. The president stands alone in the dimly lit Oval Office, contemplating not victory or loss but the delicate balance of power and humanity. Olivia sits quietly on her couch at home, staring at a blank television screen, her mind replaying every choice she made. Daniel tucks his daughter into bed, knowing that his work may one day force him into similar life-or-death decisions. These final scenes distill the essence of the story: that catastrophe was not avoided through perfection but through human resilience, empathy, and flawed but earnest judgment. Even after the credits roll, the film lingers like a question that cannot be easily answered. It challenges the viewer to think about the world not as a stable framework of treaties and deterrence but as a collective endeavor maintained by people doing their best under extraordinary pressure. It asks whether humanity can rely on systems that depend on perfect judgment when judgment itself is shaped by emotion and circumstance. It asks whether technological safeguards can withstand the unpredictability of human behavior, both inside and outside command centers. And it asks what responsibility each of us carries in a world where the consequences of conflict could be civilization ending. In this sense, A House of Dynamite is not only a film but a meditation on the human condition. It speaks to our fears, our hopes, and our need for connection even in the darkest moments. It reminds us that leadership is an act of courage not because it guarantees success but because it requires individuals to make impossible choices for the sake of millions. It portrays crisis not as spectacle but as a deeply emotional journey shaped by vulnerability, confusion, determination, and the quiet, unwavering desire to protect life. And in doing so, it becomes a story not just about nations but about the people who inhabit them, the people who must carry the weight of responsibility even when the world feels like a house built on explosive tensions. The sky above the Pacific is calm, almost serene, a deceptive curtain over a world teetering on the edge of annihilation. In this stillness, the first tremor of impending catastrophe is imperceptible to most, yet for the guardians of nations, those who live in rooms filled with screens, signals, and the hum of computers, it is deafening. A House of Dynamite does not begin with explosions or frantic sirens. It begins with attention to detail, a study of the human mind under the weight of unimaginable responsibility. Captain Olivia Walker is at her station in the White House Situation Room, a figure of concentration framed against a backdrop of blinking monitors and scrolling intelligence feeds. Every movement is purposeful, every glance measured, but behind her calm exterior simmers the knowledge that her decisions, though seemingly minute, could ripple into consequences measured in millions of lives. The subtlety of the film's opening is deliberate. It insists that the real terror is not in the missile itself, but in the human decisions it will provoke, in the moments of hesitation and judgment that will define history. The narrative tension tightens as radar arrays detect the anomaly, a missile in mid-flight, a projectile unclaimed, trajectory uncertain. For Captain Walker, this is the first domino in a cascade of choices that must be made without certainty, without precedent. The camera lingers on her hands as she inputs codes, her fingers precise yet trembling slightly, betraying the enormity of the situation. She communicates with military commanders, relays data to analysts, and synthesizes intelligence that, while accurate, is incomplete. Every report she reads contains shades of ambiguity, conflicting signals, delayed confirmations, unverified origins. And yet, her training and instinct propel her forward, a constant negotiation between fear and duty. Meanwhile, Major Daniel Gonzalez at Fort Greely is already deep in procedural rigor. The film's depiction of the missile defense operations is meticulous, almost obsessive, conveying both awe and anxiety. Gonzalez is surrounded by consoles, officers, and blinking lights, each representing a chain of decisions that could avert or precipitate disaster. He moves with calm urgency, issuing orders and cross-checking protocols, aware that the interceptors are a fragile barrier against a seemingly unstoppable force. Bigelow's cinematography captures this with a precision that heightens tension, the hum of equipment, the flicker of displays, the synchronized choreography of trained hands. Here, heroism is quiet, it is measured not by bravado but by the willingness to face uncertainty head-on. In Washington, D.C., the stakes amplify. The president, portrayed by Idris Elba with a gravitas that balances authority and vulnerability, is faced with choices that cannot wait. He listens to reports, questions assumptions, and absorbs the counsel of advisors whose expertise is immense, yet who are themselves human, fallible, and haunted by private anxieties. The Secretary of Defense, Reed Baker, still mourning the death of his spouse, navigates this professional maelstrom with courage interlaced with grief. The film masterfully juxtaposes the global scale of threat with deeply personal narratives, showing that even in corridors of immense power, human vulnerability shapes decisions. Every gesture, every pause, every subtle sigh becomes a note in a symphony of existential dread. The story's nonlinear structure is a powerful narrative device, replaying the same moments through different lenses. Through Olivia, we witness the procedural and cognitive precision demanded by crisis management. Through Gonzalez, we experience the physical and tactical choreography required to counter a missile threat. Through the president, we feel the psychological weight of authority, responsibility, and moral calculus. Each perspective is a lens into the labyrinth of decision-making under duress, emphasizing that while technology can extend reach and capability, it cannot replace judgment, intuition, and the human heart. Tension escalates not only through plot but through cinematic technique. Sound design is deliberate, the low-frequency vibrations of machinery, the rapid beeps of telemetry, and the rhythmic cadence of urgent communications create an atmosphere of pervasive anxiety. Silence punctuates these sounds, a pause that feels loaded with possibility, as if the universe itself is holding its breath. The film's lighting design enhances this mood, muted, cold hues dominate command centers, highlighting the sterility of institutions while contrasting the warmth of human faces strained under pressure. In these moments, Bigelow transforms procedural drama into a visceral emotional experience, immersing the audience in the psychological reality of high-stakes crisis management. The geopolitical layers of the narrative are equally compelling. The missile's origin is shrouded in ambiguity, prompting debates over retaliation, containment, and communication with allies. Analysts argue, sometimes vehemently, about probabilities and possible perpetrators: North Korea, a rogue state, a malfunctioning early warning system. The film resists simplistic resolutions, instead presenting the moral complexity inherent in nuclear deterrence. Every recommendation carries risks not merely to property or infrastructure, but to the lives of millions and to the fragile balance of international order. The audience is forced to confront the terrifying reality that even well-trained, highly informed individuals operate in realms of uncertainty where absolute correctness is unattainable. Personal relationships thread through the high-stakes narrative, grounding the story in human experience. Olivia receives a message from her sibling, a reminder of life beyond duty. Gonzalez carries the image of his daughter with him, a talisman in moments of near impossibility. The president's concern for the First Lady, physically distant yet emotionally proximate, adds a layer of personal stakes to decisions of global magnitude. These human elements are not decorative, they are central. They illustrate how personal context shapes professional judgment, how private emotions seep into public decisions, and how, ultimately, the weight of history rests on the shoulders of individuals who are profoundly human. The film's climax is less about spectacle than suspense, precision, and moral gravity. The interceptors are launched, but the narrative tension is not derived from the missile's destruction but from the human investment in its outcome. Gonzalez and his team track data with obsessive attention, recalibrating as the missile moves through each stage of flight. Olivia relays crucial updates to the president, who weighs the possible consequences of retaliation, containment, or restraint. The sequences are intercut to show overlapping perspectives, reinforcing the simultaneity of crisis and the multiplicity of decision-making processes. The audience experiences the unfolding events in real time, feeling the weight of seconds that may alter the course of history. Bigelow's attention to human psychology extends to the portrayal of grief, doubt, and resilience. Characters wrestle with conflicting desires, the desire to act decisively versus the fear of irreversible consequences, the instinct for self-preservation versus the duty to protect others. These inner conflicts are illuminated in fleeting gestures, a moment of hesitation, a word left unsaid, a hand hovering over a control panel. Through these details, the film conveys that heroism is not grandiose but quietly courageous. Success and survival are not guaranteed, they are contingent upon judgment, discipline, and sometimes, mere chance. The resolution of the crisis is deliberately ambiguous, reinforcing the film's thematic insistence on uncertainty and human fragility. The missile's origin and the political consequences remain partially unresolved, leaving the audience to dwell on the complexity of deterrence and the precariousness of global stability. Yet the emotional resolution is clear, characters are irrevocably changed by the events, having confronted the extremity of human and technological limitations. The president stands alone in contemplation, Olivia finds a moment of private relief, Gonzalez reconnects with his family, and the audience is left with a profound appreciation for the human endeavor underlying national security. Ultimately, A House of Dynamite is a meditation on responsibility, resilience, and the moral weight of decisions under conditions of profound uncertainty. It interrogates assumptions about infallibility, examines the intersection of technology and judgment, and explores the intimate, often hidden, emotional landscapes of those who bear responsibility for the survival of millions. The film reminds us that catastrophe is not merely a matter of physics or weaponry but of human action, decision-making, and ethical consideration. Its resonance extends beyond the theater or streaming screen, inviting reflection on leadership, morality, and the fragile architecture of modern civilization. The cinematic experience is immersive and unnerving, holding viewers in a state of sustained tension while simultaneously offering intimate emotional payoffs. It bridges the technical precision of military operations with the psychological realism of human vulnerability. Every frame is charged with meaning, the glow of radar screens, the hum of servers, the flicker of warning lights, the quiet gestures of characters carrying immense responsibility. In these details, Bigelow communicates not spectacle but authenticity, emphasizing that the most dramatic events in human history often unfold in quiet rooms filled with people making decisions that may never be known to the world but whose consequences are vast. This film is also a philosophical exploration, questioning the limits of control, the ethics of preemptive action, and the human capacity for courage under incomprehensible pressure. It suggests that leadership is not simply about strategy or authority but about the willingness to confront moral ambiguity, to make choices in conditions of extreme uncertainty, and to carry the burden of those choices afterward. The story resonates with contemporary anxieties, reflecting not only on the fragility of global security systems but on the universal human condition, our simultaneous power and vulnerability, our capacity for heroism and error, our interdependence and isolation. In conclusion, A House of Dynamite transcends the conventions of thriller and disaster genres, offering a profound meditation on human responsibility, technological limitations, and moral courage. It depicts not only the operational and tactical dimensions of nuclear crisis but the intimate, human consequences of living under systems of immense power and risk. It challenges viewers to consider the unseen individuals behind the headlines, the decision-makers whose actions may shape the fate of millions, and the quiet courage required to act ethically in moments when no choice is guaranteed to be correct. By immersing the audience in both the technical precision and the human complexity of nuclear crisis management, the film delivers an experience that is tense, compelling, and deeply thought-provoking, leaving viewers with lingering questions about morality, governance, and the precariousness of contemporary civilization. A House of Dynamite unfolds with an immediacy that is both cinematic and existential. The opening scenes depict the quiet monotony of national security operations, a world in which high-level monitoring is constant but rarely dramatic. Early shots place the audience in the control rooms of the United States Missile Defense System, with screens flickering with data, satellites transmitting telemetry, and radar operators scanning for anomalies. These operators are not faceless cogs. Bigelow's direction humanizes them, showing subtle eye twitches, micro-expressions, and the nervous exchange of glances that convey both tension and professional discipline. This attention to microbehavior establishes the film's core tension. Small human decisions in a high-stakes environment can determine life or death on a global scale. The narrative is constructed around the principle of multiplicity of perspective. The first major narrative segment, often called Inclination is Flattening, focuses on the political leadership. It is here that viewers first meet President Idris Elba, a man whose presence radiates authority but whose inner life is carefully shaded with doubt, private fear, and concern for his family. Early scenes introduce his routine, from the controlled environment of the Oval Office to private moments with the First Lady, who provides a quiet emotional anchor. The script emphasizes that even those at the apex of power are not immune to personal vulnerability. Elba's performance conveys tension with subtle gestures, the clenching of a jaw, the quick scanning of documents, the forced smile during a ceremonial function juxtaposed with moments of private indecision. This duality underscores the film's recurring theme that leadership is a series of ethical and emotional negotiations, balancing public duty and private conscience. The political storyline develops further as key aides, including chief of staff and senior advisors, struggle to interpret early warning data. These scenes are laden with technical dialogue, acronyms, and references to classified systems, yet Oppenheim's screenplay ensures accessibility by weaving in clarifying exposition. The audience learns about the National Security Council's emergency protocols, communication hierarchies, and the delicate dance of political optics versus operational reality. Each line of dialogue carries weight, with the unspoken threat of global annihilation hanging over even minor exchanges. In this segment, Bigelow excels at creating tension through anticipation rather than spectacle. The suspense derives from procedural accuracy and the high stakes of decision-making under uncertainty. Parallel to this political narrative is the military perspective, explored in the segment Hitting a Bullet with a Bullet. Here, the film transitions into a more kinetic mode without sacrificing realism. The audience is introduced to Captain Olivia Walker, portrayed by Rebecca Ferguson, whose calm precision contrasts sharply with the escalating tension around her. Walker becomes the viewer's guide through the complex machinery of missile defense, targeting computers, early warning radars, interceptor silos, and real-time data feeds. Bigelow's camera lingers on hands poised over keyboards, screens displaying streams of code and ballistic trajectories, and officers murmuring calculations to one another. The film emphasizes the margin for error, showing that even a fraction of a second's delay or misinterpretation can have catastrophic consequences. This microcosmic tension mirrors the macro-level stakes presented in the political storyline, creating a layered narrative in which personal responsibility and institutional duty intersect. Walker's arc is as much psychological as procedural. She is acutely aware of the weight of her role and is haunted by the ethical dilemmas inherent in the possibility of nuclear retaliation. The film portrays her internal conflict through quiet visual storytelling, a lingering shot of her paused over a console, eyes reflecting the glow of screens, moments of hesitation before executing commands, and the occasional subtle tremor in her hands. These moments humanize the high-tech environment, reminding viewers that behind every automated system is a person grappling with profound ethical and emotional consequences. The third narrative perspective, A House Filled with Dynamite, returns to the top levels of political leadership and delves into the deeply human costs of crisis management. Secretary of Defense Reed Baker, played by Jared Harris, embodies the tension between professional duty and personal grief. The film spends time exploring Baker's mourning process, his solitary walks, late-night reflections, and symbolic gestures of remembrance for his deceased spouse. This personal tragedy is not incidental, it informs his approach to decision-making and highlights a central theme, that the human psyche is an active player in geopolitical stability. Baker's grief intersects with the mechanical precision of defense systems and the rational expectations of political protocol, creating a rich tension that drives much of the film's dramatic energy. Interactions between Baker and the president reveal the film's exploration of trust, communication, and hierarchical responsibility. Scenes of high-level meetings are meticulously staged, the weight of silence between dialogue, the strategic positioning of individuals in the room, and the subtle signaling of authority and uncertainty. The screenplay emphasizes that misinterpretation or delayed communication at this level can have irreparable consequences. The repeated motif of the countdown, whether literal in missile tracking or metaphorical in decision-making, serves as both narrative device and thematic reinforcement, underscoring the film's meditation on the fragile intersection of time, technology, and human judgment. Bigelow's attention to visual language extends beyond character work into symbolic cinematography. The recurring motif of corridors, both literal and metaphorical, emphasizes constrained decision-making. Leaders are literally and figuratively navigating narrow paths where each step carries immense consequence. Lighting contrasts, harsh fluorescent lights in control rooms, soft warm light in personal quarters, underscore the duality of public responsibility versus private reflection. The film's color palette, grounded in muted tones punctuated by stark flashes of red or orange during critical moments, visually reinforces tension, urgency, and the constant presence of danger. Musical scoring by Volker Bertelmann is equally deliberate. Rather than relying on overtly dramatic orchestration, the score uses subtle pulses, electronic undercurrents, and sparse instrumentation to mimic the rhythm of anxiety, the heartbeat of suspense, and the steady tick of procedural countdowns. In combination with the diegetic sounds of monitors, key taps, and distant alarms, the auditory landscape immerses viewers in the relentless pressure experienced by both military personnel and political leaders. The film's thematic density is matched by its narrative complexity. Bigelow and Oppenheim explore the paradoxes of deterrence theory, questioning whether the structures designed to prevent nuclear conflict simultaneously heighten the risk of miscalculation. The triptych narrative underscores the multiplicity of perspective. The same event, a missile launch, can be interpreted differently depending on one's positional authority, access to information, and personal biases. These narrative repetitions are never redundant, each recontextualization adds emotional depth, moral ambiguity, or procedural clarity, enriching the audience's understanding of the crisis and the characters' responses. The interplay of human emotion and technical machinery is further reinforced through secondary characters. Officers and aides, each given brief but meaningful screen time, illustrate the broader societal ecosystem supporting leadership decisions. Their interactions, micro-conflicts, and ethical deliberations highlight the decentralized nature of responsibility. No one person controls the outcome, yet each individual's action contributes to the ultimate trajectory of events. This reinforces a core theme of the film, that modern existential threats are managed through a combination of hierarchical authority, distributed expertise, and human intuition, all operating under intense time pressure. Character development is meticulously layered. President Elba evolves from a figure of controlled authority to a leader who must reconcile instinct, moral judgment, and institutional expectation. Captain Walker's arc traces the journey from disciplined operational executor to reflective moral agent, highlighting the tension between procedural adherence and ethical choice. Secretary Baker's grief and professionalism intertwine, culminating in decisions that reflect the delicate balance of human frailty and professional rigor. These arcs intersect, overlap, and resonate across the triptych structure, producing a rich emotional and narrative texture that sustains suspense and thematic engagement across the runtime. Scenes of political deliberation, military coordination, and personal reflection are intercut with moments of stark realism, including communications failures, data ambiguities, and the sometimes chaotic nature of rapid response decision-making. Bigelow avoids sensationalism. Explosions, while present, are rare and deliberate, emphasizing that the true stakes of nuclear crisis are psychological, procedural, and ethical rather than merely cinematic. The narrative architecture conveys the slow burn of crisis, the tension of each decision point, and the omnipresent shadow of catastrophe, creating a suspenseful yet contemplative viewing experience. Symbolism permeates the film. The missile itself functions as both literal threat and metaphor for the unpredictable consequences of human action, technology, and geopolitics. Control rooms are visual metaphors for the constrained agency of leaders, corridors symbolize ethical and procedural narrowness, and repeated imagery of clocks, timers, and countdown sequences underscore the inexorable pressure of time. Even personal objects, photographs, mementos, and subtle gestures of remembrance, serve as narrative anchors, grounding large-scale political decisions in profoundly human emotional stakes. Reception of the film has underscored its intellectual and emotional impact. Premiering at the Venice International Film Festival, it garnered critical acclaim for its tension, realism, and moral depth. Critics praised Bigelow's mastery of suspense without reliance on conventional action tropes, as well as the cast's nuanced performances. The film has sparked discussion about the accuracy of nuclear defense depiction, but even detractors acknowledge its power as a meditation on human responsibility, the fragility of technological systems, and the profound weight of leadership in times of crisis. Audiences worldwide have noted its capacity to induce both suspense and reflection, making it not only entertainment but a philosophical exploration of existential threat, human fallibility, and systemic fragility. Ultimately, A House of Dynamite succeeds as both thriller and reflective inquiry. It engages viewers on multiple levels, psychologically, ethically, technically, and emotionally, without resorting to simplification or melodrama. Its narrative complexity, character depth, procedural realism, and thematic richness make it a landmark work of modern cinema, a meditation on the fragility of systems, the weight of human choice, and the constant presence of danger in a technologically sophisticated world. By blending procedural exactitude with emotional resonance and philosophical inquiry, Bigelow delivers a film that challenges, provokes, and immerses, creating an unforgettable cinematic experience that lingers long after the credits roll. The psychological dimension of the film becomes increasingly central as the narrative unfolds, revealing the human cost behind abstract policies and technical procedures. Walker's journey, for instance, is not merely professional, it is profoundly existential. She confronts the limits of her expertise and the insufficiency of her training against a scenario no one has ever truly rehearsed. Each beep, alert, and communication she receives is an echo of an immense unseen threat, a reminder that the very systems designed to protect her country are, in many ways, inadequate. Her internal conflict, balancing duty, ethical responsibility, and personal fear, mirrors the broader societal unease about nuclear stability. Ferguson's performance highlights subtle micro-expressions, a tightening jaw, a momentary lapse in composure, the silent intake of breath that speaks more than words ever could. These moments are framed against the sterile, almost surgical architecture of the White House Situation Room, reinforcing the stark contrast between human vulnerability and technological apparatus. Major Gonzalez, meanwhile, embodies the soldier's paradox, trained for precision, yet powerless in the face of variables beyond calculation. His scenes in Alaska are meticulously constructed to evoke both isolation and responsibility. The barren, snow-covered landscapes, captured in Aykroyd's camera work with a frigid immediacy, mirror Gonzalez's internal state. The juxtaposition of extreme environmental conditions with the potential for apocalyptic destruction heightens the sense that humans are puny actors in a theater of immense forces. Gonzalez's personal moments, especially his unrecorded messages to his daughter, are not mere subplots, they function as emotional anchors, allowing the audience to glimpse the intimate cost of decisions that might affect millions. These scenes underscore a core theme: even in a technologically advanced society, human emotion remains a critical variable in crises. The film's second perspective, dominated by General Brady, Anna Park, and the National Security Advisor, emphasizes the tension between institutional procedure and moral responsibility. The characters debate, deliberate, and argue over intelligence that is simultaneously abundant and insufficient. Every decision is a gamble, yet the stakes are unthinkably high. Brady's insistence on action represents the traditional, militaristic worldview: threats must be countered decisively. Park's cautions, rooted in an understanding of geopolitical nuance, challenge this assumption, questioning whether action might precipitate the very disaster it seeks to prevent. This dialectic is emblematic of broader real-world tensions between military command and diplomatic prudence. It illustrates the delicate balance between deterrence and provocation, highlighting that decisions in such scenarios are rarely technical, they are moral, ethical, and deeply human. The National Security Advisor functions as both mediator and audience surrogate, often articulating doubts and questions the audience may have but framed in professional, plausible discourse. Through his interactions, the film explores the concept of paralysis by analysis, a theme increasingly relevant in an era of instantaneous global communication and real-time intelligence. While algorithms, satellites, and interceptors provide data, they cannot account for human psychology, the possibility of error, misjudgment, or overreaction. Here, the narrative emphasizes a critical insight: technology amplifies both human competence and human fallibility, making leaders simultaneously more informed and more vulnerable to miscalculation. Turning to the president's perspective, the film delves deeply into the emotional and moral burdens of ultimate authority. Idris Elba's portrayal is nuanced, embodying gravitas tempered by doubt, decisiveness shadowed by empathy, and power juxtaposed with personal vulnerability. The film underscores that leadership in moments of existential threat is not only a matter of strategic calculation but also of emotional endurance. The president interacts with advisors, military leaders, and aides, balancing protocol with instinct. Yet the narrative also emphasizes his isolation: decisions must be made alone, and the weight of potential consequences is inescapable. Scenes depicting his hesitations, reflections, and private confrontations with the enormity of the crisis reveal that even the most powerful individuals are not immune to fear, doubt, or moral uncertainty. Secretary of Defense Reed Baker represents another facet of the human response to impending catastrophe. Jared Harris infuses the role with a tragic gravitas, capturing the psychological strain of long-term grief compounded by immediate responsibility. Baker's internal conflict, grappling with professional obligation while mourning personal loss, renders his eventual act of stepping away into suicide not as a dramatic flourish but as an emotionally coherent culmination of his arc. The sequence is filmed with a deliberate pace, focusing on subtle physical cues: a slow ascent up the staircase, a final glance over the city, and a hesitant step forward. These choices foreground the intimate human cost of geopolitical crises, reminding the audience that behind every policy decision are individuals who bear immense psychological burdens. Cinematically, the film employs a deliberate visual language to reinforce tension. Ackroyd cinematography alternates between wide, isolating shots of cold, impersonal landscapes and tight, claustrophobic framing of human subjects. This interplay creates a visual rhythm that mirrors the narrative's oscillation between macro-level geopolitical stakes and intimate, personal experiences. Handheld camera work, particularly in the Situation Room and at Fort Greely, imparts a documentary-like immediacy, immersing viewers in the action and heightening the sense of verisimilitude. Lighting and color grading further distinguish perspectives. The Situation Room is bathed in cold, fluorescent light emphasizing procedural sterility. The missile base is depicted with naturalistic, harsh winter lighting emphasizing isolation. The presidential arc employs warmer, softer tones, providing emotional contrast while reinforcing the human dimension of leadership. Musically, Volker Bertelmann's score functions as a subtle psychological undercurrent rather than a conventional action motif. Sustained, low-frequency tones and delicate electronic textures permeate critical sequences, amplifying tension without resorting to overt dramatization. Moments of near silence, punctuated by environmental sounds, footsteps, clicking consoles, distant sirens, create an auditory tension that mirrors the characters' internal states. The interplay of music and ambient sound reinforces the film's thematic insistence on realism. This is not a conventional thriller. It is a study in psychological suspense, existential threat, and human vulnerability. From a production standpoint, the film reflects meticulous research and consultation with experts in military strategy, nuclear policy, and emergency management. The depiction of missile defense protocols, though dramatized for narrative effect, draws upon real-world data and plausible scenarios, lending credibility to the narrative. The filmmakers also incorporate contemporary communication technology, such as encrypted messaging, secure video links, and situational awareness dashboards, enhancing the sense of immediacy and modernity. These production choices reinforce the narrative's core argument: in a hyperconnected, technologically complex world, the margin for error is slim, and human judgment remains central. Geopolitically, the film engages with contemporary anxieties surrounding nuclear proliferation, deterrence theory, and global interdependence. By refusing to identify the missile's origin, the narrative highlights the fragility of attribution in modern conflict, where misinterpretation can be as deadly as intentional aggression. The film critiques simplistic narratives of good versus evil, illustrating the ambiguity inherent in international relations and the difficulty of making morally coherent choices under extreme uncertainty. It prompts reflection on the systemic vulnerabilities of the modern state and the ethical dilemmas faced by those entrusted with ultimate responsibility. The film's approach to ambiguity is one of its most striking aspects. By leaving key questions unanswered, the filmmakers compel the audience to grapple with uncertainty in a visceral way. Unlike conventional thrillers that provide resolution, A House of Dynamite mirrors the reality of existential crises. Leaders often operate without complete information, and outcomes are not guaranteed. This narrative strategy heightens tension while also fostering reflection, encouraging viewers to consider how they might respond in analogous circumstances. In doing so, the film transcends entertainment, positioning itself as a cultural meditation on leadership, responsibility, and the fragility of modern civilization. Character interactions throughout the film are structured to emphasize both the procedural and the personal. Small moments, an offhand joke, a brief expression of fatigue, a whispered worry, serve to humanize otherwise high-stakes, abstract scenarios. These interactions also underscore the relational dimension of crisis management. Trust, communication, and interpersonal judgment are as critical as data analysis or technical capability. By foregrounding human relationships alongside institutional mechanics, the film portrays decision-making as an inherently social process, subject to emotion, error, and ethical consideration. The narrative also incorporates a subtle exploration of generational and cultural perspectives. Characters such as Anna Park, the North Korea specialist, bring specialized expertise and contextual knowledge that contrast with the more traditional, hierarchical perspectives of military leadership. Her insistence on caution and nuanced interpretation highlights the potential value of diverse perspectives in crisis resolution. The film thus engages with contemporary discussions about inclusivity, interdisciplinary collaboration, and the importance of integrating diverse epistemologies into decision-making processes. Thematically, the film emphasizes that modern society operates like a house filled with dynamite, a complex, interconnected structure where small errors or unexpected actions can trigger cascading effects. The missile functions both as a literal threat and as a metaphor for systemic vulnerability. The film interrogates assumptions about technological reliability, institutional cohesion, and the predictability of adversaries. In doing so, it encourages viewers to reflect on the broader fragility of the modern world, from climate risks to cyber threats, and to recognize the ethical, psychological, and strategic dimensions of living under continuous risk. The use of time and narrative structure is crucial to the film's tension. By dividing the story into overlapping perspectives, the filmmakers create a polyphonic narrative that mirrors the multifaceted nature of real-world crises. Each perspective contributes unique information, shaping and reshaping the audience's understanding as events unfold. This narrative design reflects the disjointed, uncertain nature of intelligence work and decision-making, emphasizing that perception is always partial, provisional, and mediated by interpretation. In conclusion, A House of Dynamite is not merely a thriller, it is a meditation on leadership, ethics, technology, and human vulnerability in the context of existential threat. Its meticulous attention to psychological realism, geopolitical nuance, and cinematic craft creates an experience that is both intellectually rigorous and emotionally compelling. The film forces viewers to confront the tension between human fallibility and technological promise, the interplay of personal grief and public duty, and the precariousness of global security. By refusing conventional resolution, it challenges audiences to sit with uncertainty, to reflect on responsibility, and to recognize the ever-present potential for catastrophe in a world brimming with both power and fragility. Its significance extends beyond the screen, provoking reflection on the ethical, psychological, and strategic dimensions of living in a technologically interconnected, high-stakes world. In doing so, it transforms the medium of film into a vehicle for public discourse, moral inquiry, and existential reflection. The narrative complexity of A House of Dynamite is matched by the meticulous attention paid to its setting and mise-en-scene. The White House Situation Room, captured in intricate detail, serves not only as the central location for the unfolding crisis but also as a symbol of the immense responsibility and high-stakes environment in which the characters operate. Every prop, screen, and piece of technology is carefully selected to reinforce authenticity, creating a sense of immersion that makes the tension palpable. The room itself becomes a character, reflecting the pressure cooker atmosphere of decision-making, where every beep, phone call, and report can potentially alter the course of events. The cinematography emphasizes the claustrophobic nature of the space, using tight shots and controlled lighting to heighten the feeling of confinement and urgency, while wider angles illustrate the networked complexity of the personnel involved, underscoring the interdependence of intelligence, military, and political actors. In addition to the White House, other critical locations include the U.S. Strategic Command in Nebraska and the missile launch and tracking sites, where the physical reality of the threat is grounded in precise detail. The depiction of missile silos, command centers, and monitoring stations is informed by real-world protocols and equipment, enhancing the verisimilitude of the narrative. This attention to technical realism complements the film's dramatic tension, as viewers are made acutely aware of the precision and coordination required to manage a national-level crisis. Bigelow's decision to blend practical sets with subtle visual effects ensures that the film maintains both credibility and cinematic dynamism, avoiding over-reliance on spectacle while sustaining visual interest. The nonlinear narrative not only heightens suspense but also allows for a profound exploration of character psychology. As the timeline loops through different perspectives, subtle shifts in dialogue, expression, and action reveal previously hidden motivations and internal conflicts. Viewers are encouraged to actively engage with the story, piecing together information from each perspective to develop a holistic understanding of the unfolding crisis. This narrative layering mirrors the real-world challenges of intelligence analysis and decision-making under pressure, where incomplete or conflicting information can dramatically influence outcomes. Each iteration of the timeline adds nuance to the characters' ethical dilemmas, illustrating how perspective shapes interpretation and how human judgment operates under uncertainty. Captain Olivia Walker's arc is particularly compelling, as her role demands the reconciliation of procedural adherence with moral judgment. Throughout the narrative, Walker is faced with choices that pit protocol against human instinct, forcing her to weigh the consequences of inaction as heavily as those of action. Her interactions with other characters, including the President and General Brady, illuminate the interplay between professional responsibility and personal conscience. Walker's analytical mindset and steadfast composure under pressure serve as a counterbalance to the more impulsive and aggressive instincts of military leadership, emphasizing the film's exploration of diverse approaches to crisis management. Her performance underscores the human dimension of governance, highlighting the emotional and ethical stakes inherent in decisions that carry life-or-death consequences. General Anthony Brady's trajectory further illuminates the psychological toll of command. His insistence on decisive military action is tempered by glimpses of vulnerability and doubt, revealing the internal conflicts faced by leaders whose decisions carry existential implications. The film carefully depicts the moral ambiguity of Brady's position, illustrating how training, duty, and personal conviction intersect to shape behavior in high-pressure environments. Through Brady's perspective, viewers gain insight into the cognitive and emotional challenges inherent in leadership, including the tension between strategic rationality and instinctive risk assessment. This multidimensional portrayal of military leadership contributes to the film's overarching examination of the human factors that underpin institutional decision-making. Idris Elba's portrayal of the president embodies the ultimate burden of leadership. The film delves into his decision-making process with meticulous attention, revealing both the intellectual rigor and emotional strain required to balance competing counsel, interpret incomplete intelligence, and consider the moral ramifications of potential action. Elba conveys the immense weight of authority, capturing the psychological complexity of a figure who must navigate uncertainty while maintaining composure and credibility. The president's interactions with his advisors underscore the interplay between political considerations and ethical imperatives, highlighting the tension between public responsibility and private conscience. His perspective serves as the narrative anchor, grounding the film's thematic exploration of power, accountability, and human fallibility. The ensemble supporting cast contributes significantly to the film's layered narrative. Characters such as Jake Barrington, Secretary of Defense Reed Baker, Major Daniel Gonzalez, and Kathy Rogers provide diverse perspectives on the crisis, representing intelligence analysis, strategic oversight, field operations, and emergency management. Each character is meticulously developed, with nuanced motivations and distinct approaches to problem solving. The interactions between these figures illustrate the complexity of coordination and communication within a large, hierarchical organization, emphasizing the interdependence of individuals whose collective decisions determine national outcomes. The film's attention to character depth reinforces its thematic focus on human judgment, ethical responsibility, and the consequences of individual and collective action. In terms of technical execution, Barry Ackroyd's cinematography is instrumental in conveying the tension and urgency of the narrative. The visual language of the film employs a combination of tight, confined shots to emphasize pressure and wide, dynamic compositions to depict the scope of the crisis. Lighting is carefully calibrated to evoke both the realism of operational environments and the psychological intensity experienced by the characters. The interplay of shadow and illumination underscores moments of moral ambiguity, uncertainty, and emotional vulnerability. Kirk Baxter's editing ensures coherence within the complex narrative structure, skillfully guiding the audience through overlapping timelines without sacrificing clarity or dramatic momentum. Volker Bertelmann's score and Paul N. J. Ottison's sound design work in tandem to heighten suspense, accentuate emotional beats, and reinforce the narrative's authenticity, creating a fully immersive cinematic experience. Thematic elements permeate every aspect of the film. At its core, A House of Dynamite examines the fragility of nuclear deterrence, the ethical and psychological burdens of authority, and the consequences of human error under extreme pressure. The film challenges viewers to consider the paradoxes inherent in modern defense systems, where instruments of destruction exist to prevent destruction, and where decision-making is constrained by both protocol and moral consideration. It raises questions about accountability, the limitations of foresight, and the unpredictable nature of crises, prompting reflection on the responsibilities borne by those in positions of power. Through its exploration of these themes, the film transcends the immediate narrative of a missile crisis, offering a meditation on leadership, morality, and the human condition under existential threat. The marketing and reception of A House of Dynamite reflect its dual nature as both a suspenseful thriller and a work of thematic depth. Teasers and trailers emphasize the immediacy of the crisis, the procedural intricacies of the White House and military operations, and the psychological intensity faced by each character. The global release on Netflix ensured accessibility while retaining the prestige associated with festival premieres. Critical responses highlighted the film's technical excellence, narrative innovation, and thematic ambition, while some viewers expressed frustration with the ambiguous resolution, demonstrating the polarizing effect of its narrative choices. Nevertheless, the film succeeded in generating discussion and engagement, prompting analysis of leadership, ethical decision-making, and the moral dimensions of national security in contemporary society. The world exists in a delicate tension, a balance so fragile that even a whisper of uncertainty can reverberate across continents. Humans live their lives assuming constancy, stability, and control, while the machinery of global defense, intelligence, and diplomacy hums silently beneath the surface, holding realities together that the average person rarely contemplates. It is in this tension between normalcy and catastrophe that A House of Dynamite situates its story, a narrative that immerses the audience into a scenario both terrifyingly plausible and emotionally searing. The film does not begin with explosions or frantic sirens, as one might expect from the thriller genre. Instead, it begins with meticulous observation, the quiet hum of computers, the blinking lights of radar screens, and the disciplined calm of people trained to navigate uncertainty, whose decisions may very well decide the fate of millions. Captain Olivia Walker is introduced in the White House Situation Room, surrounded by screens displaying live intelligence feeds, communications intercepts, and satellite imagery. Her role is precision itself, demanding constant attention to the minutiae of global activity, the subtle shifts in Chinese naval formations, the abrupt disappearance of North Korean communications, unusual troop movements near disputed territories. Her hands glide across keyboards with practiced precision, her eyes scanning streams of data for inconsistencies or anomalies. Yet beneath her composed exterior lies the undeniable human response to stakes so high that they border on the unimaginable. She is not a cinematic hero in the traditional sense, she does not carry a weapon, nor does she need to. Her tools are knowledge, attention, and the ability to make rapid, high-stakes decisions while under immense stress. Simultaneously, in Alaska, Major Daniel Gonzalez supervises the missile defense operations at Fort Greely. Here, the threat is tangible, mechanical, and immediate. The ground-based mid-course defense system, while impressive in capability, is imperfect, a fragile shield whose success is never guaranteed. Gonzalez moves with a combination of military discipline and human anxiety, issuing orders, cross-verifying system readings, and ensuring that the crew remains focused despite the looming specter of failure. The film immerses the audience in procedural realism. Every console flicker, every data alert, every confirmation sequence is infused with the knowledge that these small actions carry consequences that extend beyond the walls of the base. The tension is not manufactured through spectacle but through attention to detail, highlighting the fragility and importance of human decision-making in systems designed to protect entire nations. The narrative expands to the corridors of power in Washington, D.C., where the president, portrayed with gravitas by Idris Elba, confronts the enormity of leadership in the face of an undefined threat. Unlike conventional portrayals of authority, this president is human, grappling with personal vulnerabilities, the weight of moral responsibility, and the need to interpret conflicting intelligence with incomplete data. His Secretary of Defense, Reed Baker, portrayed by Jared Harris, is still grieving, carrying the emotional burden of recent personal loss even as he navigates the stakes of global security. Their conversations are intense but measured, combining technical jargon with deeply human emotion. The film underscores the reality that in the highest offices of power, the decisions that shape history are made by individuals whose personal lives and emotional landscapes profoundly influence their professional judgment. The story's nonlinear structure is a central narrative device, replaying the critical moments from different perspectives to highlight the multidimensional nature of crisis. Through Olivia, we experience the cognitive precision demanded by national security officers, through Gonzalez, the physical and tactical orchestration of defense mechanisms, through the president, the psychological and ethical complexity of ultimate decision-making. Each perspective contributes to a composite understanding of the crisis, emphasizing that neither technology nor protocol can substitute for human judgment, empathy, and courage. The tension is further heightened through sophisticated cinematic techniques. The sound design is meticulous, capturing the low-frequency hum of servers, the rhythmic beeping of radar, and the clipped, urgent communication between teams. Silence punctuates these sounds, creating a space where anticipation and dread intermingle. Lighting is deliberately muted and cold in command centers, emphasizing the sterility and clinical precision of bureaucratic spaces, while highlighting the warmth of human faces strained by responsibility. Bigelow's direction transforms procedural operations into an emotionally immersive experience, forcing the audience to inhabit the same uncertainty, urgency, and moral weight as the characters themselves. Geopolitically, the film explores the terrifying ambiguity of unclaimed nuclear threats. The missile detected over the Pacific may have originated from North Korea, a rogue faction, a malfunctioning system, or an as-yet unknown actor. Intelligence reports conflict, analysts dispute interpretations, and allies hesitate or remain silent. The film refuses to offer a simplistic solution, instead presenting the ethical complexity inherent in nuclear deterrence and defense strategy. Each recommendation carries the weight of irreversible consequences. A preemptive strike could ignite global conflict, inaction could result in unparalleled destruction. The viewer is constantly reminded that the distinction between heroism and catastrophe is razor-thin, dependent upon incomplete data and human judgment. Within this high-stakes political and technical environment, A House of Dynamite remains deeply human. Olivia, at moments of rare solitude, checks messages from family, revealing her longing for connection and grounding. Gonzalez carries with him a photograph of his daughter, a reminder of what he is protecting and a source of both motivation and vulnerability. The president worries about the First Lady, physically distant yet emotionally central, demonstrating how personal relationships intersect with public duty. These threads are not incidental, they ground the narrative in the universal human experience, underscoring that even amidst global crises, individuals are compelled by emotion, love, fear, and moral obligation. As the missile approaches its mid-course trajectory, operational tension reaches its peak. Gonzalez and his team execute intercept procedures with obsessive precision, cross-checking trajectories, recalibrating targeting systems, and monitoring telemetry. Olivia relays updates to the president in real time, each second pregnant with consequence. The audience experiences these moments as a simultaneity of action and consequence, a symphony of overlapping perspectives converging toward a climax that is as emotionally charged as it is technically intricate. Here, heroism is rendered not through spectacle but through competence, ethical decision-making, and the courage to act under extreme uncertainty. The ethical dilemmas faced by leadership are profound. Should the United States retaliate without confirmed attribution? Is restraint an act of wisdom or a sign of weakness? The film meticulously examines these questions, showing that every choice is layered with moral, emotional, and geopolitical complexity. The president absorbs advice, debates, and dissenting opinions, yet remains aware that ultimate responsibility cannot be deferred. The tension is psychological as much as operational, a study in the burden of leadership when outcomes cannot be controlled, predicted, or guaranteed. Sound and visual design amplify this tension. The low hum of computer systems, the rhythmic beeping of radar, the soft click of buttons, all contribute to a palpable atmosphere of anxiety. Lighting choices underscore the contrast between human warmth and institutional coldness, reinforcing the narrative's central tension between human judgment and systemic process. Bigelow's technique ensures that the audience experiences the emotional weight of crisis as viscerally as the characters themselves, making every decision, hesitation, and communication a point of intense narrative engagement. The resolution of the immediate crisis is intentionally ambiguous. While interceptors are launched and some success is reported, the missile's full trajectory and potential consequences remain uncertain. The president decides, not with certainty, but with ethical conviction shaped by incomplete information and human intuition. The Secretary of Defense navigates grief and responsibility simultaneously, reflecting the intersection of personal emotion and public duty. Gonzalez concludes operations with hope tempered by realism, recognizing that success is never absolute, and failure is always possible. Olivia reflects privately, processing fear and relief simultaneously, highlighting the human need to reconcile internal states with external outcomes. Through these converging storylines, the film emphasizes that catastrophe is not merely a matter of technology or geopolitical circumstance, it is a function of human decision-making, emotion, and moral judgment. The narrative reveals the vulnerability and resilience of individuals entrusted with extraordinary responsibility, underscoring that global stability often depends on the courage, intelligence, and ethical discernment of those operating behind the scenes. Each character is portrayed as deeply human, facing doubt, grief, moral ambiguity, and fear, yet compelled to act in service of a higher responsibility. The cinematic experience is immersive and meticulously crafted. Every frame, sound cue, and character gesture is laden with meaning. The audience is not invited to passively observe but to inhabit the psychological and operational reality of a nuclear crisis, to feel the tension of high-stakes decision-making, the weight of moral responsibility, and the intensity of ethical deliberation under uncertainty. Bigelow transforms what could be a technical thriller into a profound exploration of human resilience, vulnerability, and the moral dimensions of power. The political and philosophical undercurrents of the narrative resonate beyond the plot. The film interrogates assumptions about infallibility, challenges notions of technological omnipotence, and emphasizes the limitations of even the most sophisticated defense systems. It presents leadership as a moral and emotional endeavor as much as a strategic or technical one, highlighting that even the most competent individuals operate within constraints imposed by incomplete information, human emotion, and the inherent unpredictability of complex systems. By the conclusion, the film leaves the audience with a sense of reflection rather than resolution. Characters are irrevocably changed, having confronted the extremity of human responsibility and technological limitations. The president contemplates the moral weight of decisions made under duress. Olivia reconciles her professional composure with personal fear. Gonzalez reconnects with his family, carrying the lessons and burdens of crisis. The audience is left to consider the precariousness of global security, the human dimensions of leadership, and the moral and ethical imperatives that shape the actions of those entrusted with extraordinary responsibility. A House of Dynamite ultimately transcends conventional genre boundaries. It is at once a thriller, a political drama, and a meditation on human responsibility, technological fragility, and ethical courage. Its narrative structure, cinematography, sound design, and character development combine to create an experience that is both intellectually and emotionally immersive. The story explores not only the mechanics of crisis management but also the psychological, moral, and emotional realities that define human action in the most extreme circumstances. In its final reflection, the film asserts that true heroism is defined not by triumph over external threats but by the courage to act ethically and decisively under conditions of uncertainty. It examines the interplay between human emotion, ethical responsibility, and systemic complexity, illustrating that global security is not merely a function of technology, policy, or doctrine, but of individuals acting with conscience, intelligence, and empathy. It challenges audiences to consider their own moral and ethical frameworks, to recognize the fragility of systems they take for granted, and to appreciate the quiet courage of those who stand between civilization and potential catastrophe. Even as the credits roll, the tension lingers. The missile's origin, the geopolitical consequences, and the full scope of the crisis remain partially unresolved, mirroring the uncertainty inherent in real-world nuclear deterrence. Yet the emotional truth is clear: the story is one of human endurance, courage, and moral responsibility, capturing the psychological and ethical dimensions of leadership, the fragility of global systems, and the profound impact of individual choices on the course of history. It is a meditation on humanity, technology, and morality, leaving a lasting impression that extends beyond the cinematic experience, compelling viewers to reflect on the delicate balance of power, responsibility, and ethical judgment that sustains our world.